I understand it's a lunch session, so we expect people to be crawling in after filling their bellies. Thank you all for coming at this time. Just to introduce myself, my name's Hanson. I'm from Meta, but I work as the technical PG lead of the OOPT group. We've got a lot on for this session, so I want to keen to get through all of that. So basically, I'm going to just kick off with an introduction to this session and why it's called From Farm to Table. And then I'm going to pass over on there to my colleague Andy. So just hold on that. And basically, what to this is that, we talk about from farm to table in the sense of food. For the sense of tip, this is how we got to in terms of developing some of those technologies that some of you heard about, or perhaps were in our morning session and speaking about that today. So from when our group of operators predominantly come up with an idea, and then they look to release basically deliverables such as use case documents or some things like white papers, and then how that gets on into forming what we call TRDs or DTRDs, technical requirements documents, or detailed ones, how that gets fed into an RFI to the vendors, those come back, get evaluated, how the products get basically developed, how we do test and validation. It's a whole cycle, right, in terms of what we're doing in here, and very much about how you're taking a recipe from a book, for something you're writing in a book, into something you're putting in front of you, and hopefully something very delicious as well. So really, what we're going to be talking through all the sessions today is around all of those topics. Various cases of technologies where we've got to some more in their infancy, some more mature as well as we go on. So basically, without further ado, just really want to get on to the next session. I'd really like to invite my colleague, Andy Furnell, who's going to come on the stage and talk about the open fixed access networks.
Thank you very much, Hanson. And as Hanson said, thank you all for joining during lunch. I hope some of you managed to get some wonderful food outside and that you're enjoying things so far. So as Hanson said, we have a variety of different initiatives that we're working on, and they're all at different stages. Those of you who attended the keynote session this morning from the co-chair of the Fixed Broadband Project Group will know that we launched a new initiative earlier on this year, which we call the Open Fixed Access Network subgroup, which is part of the Fixed Broadband Project Group. My name is Andy Furnell, and I'm the technical lead of that group, and I'm going to walk you through some of the work that we've been doing, the process that we've been following, and a brief overview of the project as well, so that you know the kind of things that we're working on. So let's start at the beginning, and more food analogies, I'm afraid. So OFAN is a collaboration between operators, as many things that we do in TIP are, who share a common vision of a more open, standards-based, and interoperable approach to building fiber-based access networks. And our work in this group is really solving for two different areas. One is interoperability, and I'm going to cover that in over the next few minutes. So first, we're solving for interoperability. We're also solving for, with interoperability comes solving for operational efficiencies. So how can we help operators build more interoperable networks, but also more networks that are more operationally efficient, that are going to not just optimize the costs of those networks, but also optimize the way that operators are maintaining, planning, building, and operating those networks. So let's speak about interoperability. And the vision of the group at the moment is fixed access networks today have interoperability challenges in two different dimensions. So first, north and southbound. Many of the existing solutions in the market today are based on very tight, often proprietary integrations between the OLTs that sit in the network and the management systems that control those OLTs. And every time you want to introduce a new vendor or a new solution into the network, there's a new piece of integration that needs to happen. And that integration is not just between an OLT and a management system, but it's also between that management system and the rest of the IT stack. It's a very difficult integration to do, and it's a very expensive integration to do. And the operators that we're working with in the Fixed Access Networks group believe that there is a need for change there. The second area that we look at is the east-west integration between different components of the fixed access network. So again, traditionally, operators are used to needing to buy the OLT in their central office and the ONT or the ONU in the customer premise from the same supplier. Even though the interfaces are based on standards, based on published open standards, quite often the operators that we're working with perceive that there are some sort of closed or proprietary extensions that get implemented on top of those open standards that impair their ability to mix and match between different OLTs or different OLT solutions in their central office and different ONTs in the field. Given that the structure of these networks is so tied to the structure of the underlying fiber assets in the ground, this is a huge problem. You end up with a vast number, hundreds of thousands or millions of ONTs deployed in the field. And when the operators look to come and replace OLTs with newer equipment, they don't just have to replace that OLT, they also have to replace the ONUs in individual customers' homes as well. Causes a lot of truck roll, a lot of disruption. So, through the OFAN group, we are aiming to develop and incubate, develop, and ultimately deploy hardware and software solutions that are addressing these interoperability challenges and that are going to enable operators to build and maintain more effective and efficient networks. The second part of what we're working on is operational efficiencies. So one part is the hardware and how you build the network. Here we're talking more about how operators are maintaining and operating that network. And there are three different areas that we're working. The first is we are enabling or aiming to enable more a new generation of operational paradigms. So more effective and efficient ways of automating the access network using SDN and programmability, using zero-touch provisioning in order to simplify the rollout of these networks in the first place and the lifecycle management and maintenance of them over time, and opening up the interfaces towards the IT stack to simplify customer provisioning and assurance. Alongside that, particularly in the hardware space, we're looking at more effective and efficient devices. Power consumption is a huge problem, especially with growing prices of energy today. So there's a lot of focus on building devices that can be more power efficient, that will pay for themselves ultimately in the reduction in power consumption and the reduction in OpEx over time. We are also working to enable the transition for a lot of these operators from today's networks based on GPON to the networks of tomorrow based on XGS-PON, and indeed further afield with new iterations of PON technology in the future. And the final part is embracing new architectures, new ways of deploying and actually constructing OLTs. So we're working, incorporating work that's being done by standards bodies, the BBF, the ONF in particular, to virtualize network functions, cloudify functions that are traditionally deployed in hardware, move them into the cloud, make them more efficient, agile, flexible, and able to support not just the services today, but also the use cases of tomorrow. So as Hanson said just now, every TIP project has a story. This is the story of the Open Fixed Access Network Group. We started in February of this year. We did a bunch of different workshops, identified that all of these operators share sort of a common vision of what are the problems and what are the opportunities. And we worked through a process. We looked at the different deployment architectures that, that operators see, FTTH, FTTP, FTTB. Where are the challenges here that are most important? We worked through the different service delivery models as well. People have sometimes traditional layer 2 networks. Some operators are looking to build more intelligence into the networks. They're building layer 3 functions into their OLTs. And some people are adopting a hybrid of the two. And the final thing, which I guess is the most important, is we looked at the scope of the solution. Like, what are we actually going to solve for here? Are we going to try and take on OLT, ONT? Do we want to look at the SDN layer? What actually are the problems that we're trying to solve for here? The outcome of that activity was the first use case of the group, ostensibly a very simple and obvious place to start, right? It is a pizza box OLT that is optimized for deployment in a central office or local exchange environment or in a street cabinet. It is optimized for GPON, XGS-PON, and combo PON interfaces, and it can be used to deliver FTTH or FTTP services. The outcome of that ideation phase was captured in a use case document. That use case document was reviewed by the Fixed Broadband Project Group in the summer, and there was a press release announcement yesterday that document has now been published for the broader industry to see. Armed with that use case, the same group of operators is now working to develop technical requirements, a set of high-level requirements for that use case that will describe in more detail the technical solution that addresses that use case. And we're looking at things like the platform architecture. What should it look like? What are the functional capabilities that are needed? What are the speeds and feeds that are needed in the hardware? We're looking at the different software capabilities that you need in order to be able to achieve that architecture. What are the different functional components? What are the different software elements that are needed in order to build an OLT? We're also working on alignment with the standards bodies. In TIP, you probably heard this a million times already in the conference, we don't build standards. We rely on the standards that are developed by other standards organizations out there, and we're working to align our requirements, our specification at the moment, with ongoing work in the Broadband Forum, as well as relevant interfaces from the ONF and the ITU. The technical requirements document is nearly complete. We spent most of yesterday in that room over there working on it. And we are looking forward to being able to publish this document for the Fixed Broadband Project Group to review in the next few weeks. We've also started working on a detailed technical requirements document that will form the basis of an RFI or a market evaluation of open and disaggregated OLT solutions that we expect to launch over the next few months. And the group is super excited about starting to see products come out and starting to bring those products into the lab for test and validation. So that's a brief introduction to the OFAN group. I appreciate it's only so much we can cover in 15 minutes. So please, if you want to know more, please join the Fixed Broadband Project Group. Please get in touch with myself or the project group community manager, and we'll be happy to discuss it more and help you learn more about the work that we do. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andy. So coming on right along, I'd like to introduce to the stage Mario Kind from Deutsche Telekom. He's going to speak about something a bit more advanced in the fixed access world, the OpenBNG.
Yep. Thank you, Hanson. Thank you. My name is Mario Kind. I'm with Deutsche Telekom. We're working at the group headquarters, working mainly on the evolution of the networks, and that's what I'm doing now for around about 2 decades in this company. And I started really with this BNG and service creation of that one, and evolved through all the different technology which are out there. So always looking in what can we do with this, what does it change, is there something that improves our service production here, and we came all along with things that you most probably all know, SDN was there, NFVs there. Access 4.0 is that our big project in our German organization, which is transforming the BNG into this new, modern, disaggregated, flexibly, more programmable thing. And we are also supporting the OpenBNG, and for sure we are moving along, and there will come more things over the course of time. And we are still excited to work on this and bring it forward, and bringing broadband services to our customers or improve them in our internal operations. So as I mentioned, we exist for the Zero project. That's where it's our main effort, and we discovered that there are these new things out there, and we discussed it with like-minded operators and came to the conclusion we have a lot of common interest, and we need to speak about this and find common ground. And that is the whole idea of OpenBNG. Before we go into our achievements, maybe just a brief introduction what we are trying to solve. And these are essentially 4 important things which are unique to OpenBNG, or not necessarily unique, but there are some unique things into BNGs that you need to know if you are not a BNG guy. So the first thing, BNG is that one critical element that we have out there in a fixed network. It's the service creation point, and most probably more than 90% of you are attached to that one, and your services are delivered from there. It is a heavy legacy-driven thing, so each and every operator does it and does it slightly different, which makes it very complex to find solutions and change something. On the other side, we are now facing with all these things which are coming from the IT industry, all these new great tools for operations support, for collecting data, for understanding what we do. And this is one of the things that drives us into also in the OpenBNG work. And on the other side, also to get these new service and operations paradigms right. We believe that we need to become flexible. It cannot be a black box anymore. We need to better pick and choose what we need, how and adapt faster than we did in the past. And last but not least, we have this ecosystem elsewhere, which is also a little bit into trouble, and the core belief was that we need to broaden that again. We need to look into innovative companies who are working on new ideas, on new ways how we operate and bring networks to here. With that introduction to the state where we are actually. So we started around about 2 years ago, and this described the first technical requirements document, which is a very high-level description of what is a BNG, what it's doing, what are the elements that we want to, what are important, and how we see to be organized. The second thing that is now done is we are having detailed the requirements in a very detailed technical level that we also published after an RFI, invited the ecosystem, the community to submit proposals that we then take from there and evaluate and bring this openness to the community back. This thing was completed in the beginning of this year. We have awarded for hardware vendors and for software vendors. We selected for hardware and software vendors for further testing. We are now into this process of, on one hand side, testing the solutions, on the other side, developing a test plan, which is going to be published soon. What you can see here is the rec of a colleague I will introduce you to in a minute that he is working on. And on the other side, today we are even further when we are having 6 suppliers for the requirements ribbon issued, where we have announced in morning 2 who received it. It's UFI Space and EdgeCore for their proposal for the hardware. So closing with this very short, brief introduction what we achieved so far, I'm inviting 2 of my colleagues to the stage. This is Hannes Kredler, co-founder, CTO of RT-Brick, one of these innovative software developers. Hannes, please come to the stage. And my colleague from BT, Paul Gunning, who is looking into OpenBNG from BT's perspective. Please take a seat. So, thanks for joining me. Long time no see. So,
thanks for having us. No see.
Well, it's a complicated time, right? We have met the first time yesterday. Absolutely. After working 2 years already together.
Yes, during lockdown.
Amazing to have you all here. Let's start with a very simple question. why is this openness and disaggregation so important to BNG? And maybe, Paul, you could go first and give some insights from BT perspective, and Hannes?
Sure. I mean, we've very successfully deployed BNGs over the last 20 years from a single supplier. It's brilliant, operational, no problems. But I can't help but wonder, maybe 40 years ago when you had mainframes and you had someone like IBM who did something completely crazy in that they disaggregated, the computer into hardware and software. And that allowed a sort of an ecosystem to develop, most notably, I suppose, Intel, which then had the chips which were used by Gateway and all that, but also you had Microsoft, and they're still there to this day. But the other thing that's really transformative was that 10 years later, it allowed somebody like Linus Torvalds to come along and say, actually, I can leverage this hardware, and I can develop, a Unix or a Linux, and give it to the world, which he's done. And now, amazingly, you have a company like Microsoft, which is using Linux in their data centers. So law of unintended consequences or beneficial consequences, I suppose.
Yeah. We are maybe not yet there, but we are disaggregated like PCs, but maybe we are on the way.
Well, in a certain way, its situation is comparable, right? It was basically the very existence of a x86 standard form factor hardware, which actually has enabled all those advances in software. And for open networking, we're here in a similar state. I mean, starting 2013, 14, you clearly saw a proliferation of merchant silicon, right? And that proliferation actually fundamentally reduces the barriers of entry for vendors doing networks products. All of a sudden, you don't really have to run your own ASIC engineering team and everything, right? You can just go and see your friends from Broadcom and the likes, and they will actually come up with a nicely engineered chip that you can bend and program in the way you want it.
Yeah, this is definitely amazing. I mean, in the end, for us as operators, Paul, you might agree to this. It's important to also see other vendors there too.
Absolutely, we want to see an ecosystem of vendors, both in terms of hardware, so choice, and also in terms of network operating systems, including RT Brick, but there are others as well. And they will compete against one another. They'll work with us, and we'll come to solutions that best match our own individual requirements. But those requirements are probably 80–90% common. There may be tiny little bits where there's a little bit of bespokeness.
Yeah, this somehow leads us directly to the question what the experiences are right now with all this new disaggregation and openness also. And maybe Hannes, you're really into that business. You're developing it. You're really into it. What is your main take? What's there? What's good? What's
I mean, what actually TIP was really doing a great service to the industry is two things. First of all, defining a sort of a standardized hardware blueprint, right? Donating that to OCP and making sure that the hardware vendors can just download the blueprints and build boxes, which is the foundation. Then number two, especially with the OpenBNG paper, what has happened is a sort of a consolidation of requirements. Interestingly, when you think about it, providing internet access, that should be a standard thing, right? No big thing. But the ground reality is that every service provider has its own twists and turns. And the OpenBNG white paper helped here to consolidate the requirements and clean up the mess in a certain way.
Yeah, and we are trying. We understand this, and I can assure you, from me, from being from the group and in DT, seeing 10 different fixed networks who are also all somehow similar, but have these tiny things which are different, and especially if we mix and match, some are under residential, some have business on it, some even provide mobile backhaul. It's really difficult to find the common ground. And maybe not sure who joined yesterday, but we have a proposal out there to provide also some guidance to narrowing down also the scope, to bring it to something which serves 80-90% and make it easier to understand, to go there. But yeah.
I mean, the thing that's quite interesting is in terms of, we've already talked about, if you like, in terms of the horizontal sort of disaggregation. There's also a sort of a rather vertical disaggregation. There's also a horizontal disaggregation in terms of operations.
Yeah.
How are we going to get this thing into the network? At the moment, we would have a single vendor. It's a black box. That's evolved over 20 years. It's a well-honed, well-oiled machine.
Yeah.
Now we're talking about, well, if we disaggregate, how are we going to manage, RT Brick and the other vendors? How are we going to manage the different hardware vendors? So some sort of system integration has to come in to look after that aspect. And then when you look in terms of temporally and along the horizontal axis, sourcing, consolidating devices into, racks, moving it operationally, to our networks. Then on day one, when it is operational, the idea of being able to continue with that box for the next 10, 15 years, continued support. When things break, that it will be replaced. So operations is a very important aspect as well as disaggregation. Yep.
Also here, timescale are different, right? Basically took you 2 decades to come up with a workable stack of routing and signaling protocols to define here a BNG. Essentially, as a new entrant to the ecosystem, I have to do the very same thing in just 2 or 3 years. Now, what we found also in our journey is an absolutely shocking state of the ability to validate whether the BNG works at scale and actually feed back that information to developers, right? We had, of course, build up our CI/CD pipeline. We had our nightly test runs, and using traditional tools, we're just going to report, hey, that whole thing has failed, but not really how has it failed or provide and extract any meaningful output to tell the developer what to fix. Out of pure frustration, we have then said, look, let's fix this once for all. Let's build our own open source tool. Maybe you heard about it. It's called BNG Blaster to actually do that mass scale validation. And since everybody has that problem, it just makes sense to return it back to the community and give something back.
Yeah, my colleagues like it. Oh, they even love it. It's a great tool.
Too, yeah.
Paul, I know that you have a different starting point than we at DT have. We are already in this Access for the Zero. We have multiple years of experience. We were even ahead of time, which has its own problems. But what is your take? How to the start, and how does TIP here help you somehow to move?
Okay, so I think the first thing would be collaboration. That we're able to sit down in a room together, technically, and share our common concerns and our common ambitions amongst ourselves, DT, BT, Telefonica, TIM, the whole gamut.
And that has been joined.
Yeah. I mean that's been the most revelatory aspect for me. And in fact, we're not competing technically, really. We're trying to come up with a common cause technically. Our companies will compete, at a product level when they got to sell into the marketplace. But it makes sense for us all to come up with common criteria to help Hannes, to help, his peers and competitors to get what you would call a leg up into getting into the networks, I'd say, lower the barriers to entry.
Oh yeah, I know. That's indeed a problem. It's based on my experience with I have also some very small operators which have really a difficult time to jump onto this.
But I think also you gave us the opportunity in the sense of DT with the Access 4.0. You're already ahead. We're traveling at a slower pace. We're coming a little bit later. But, inspired us by you and also by Hannes, that we see the opportunity going forward.
Yeah. We are already the time is running, unbelievable. Maybe one last thing. Hannes, what would your wish be for the future in TIP?
You mean since Christmas is coming very close,
okay.
It's time to put together
the one and only Christmas wish, yeah.
Well, actually I have 2. Number one, let's see if Santa complies. So number one would be once we started this, what we found really stunning is that neither in the open source world nor anywhere else except in proprietary code bases, there was no common forwarding abstraction model, right? A common API that everybody could adhere to. We saw, of course, some of the work that some of our peers were doing in Sonic, and for the data center, you have a bit of V4 forwarding, V6 forwarding, a bit of ACLs, and maybe some VXLAN tunnels, so very simplified forwarding models. Now, in the telco edge, you have, I would say, a lot of protocols and stacks that turned out to be useful, but are really old, and the combinatorial makes it difficult. So you have MPLS, you have various form of IP tunnels, L2TP, you have PPPoE, right? And sometimes you really have mix and match and hierarchical H costs. So point being, the standard, I would say, Linux provided forwarding abstraction was not capable of expressing that complexity, right? This is also what I see TIP going forward come up with some of those things where IETF has also failed 2 times so far, come up with a standardized forwarding abstraction model that addresses all those telco use cases. And number 2, and I believe this is also a bit more high up on Paul's wish list, is this was the southbound side, but on the northbound side we have a similar problem. The ability to seamlessly interwork with OSS, BSS systems. So I would like to see some modularity there as well.
Yeah, I mean, we have an OSS system that's grown organically over decades, and we would need a way to plug in your solution, so things that would be there like the Netcom, Tuang, common data models and all that will be a great help. But I think the other thing that's looking forward to the future that's I think is quite important is about 25, 30 years ago, I did optics and stuff like that, and I enjoyed it very much. But then talking to my peers and all, they whispered this thing called IP. I thought, well, what's that about, And the common consensus that was emerging was, if you had a future, in BT, you needed to get into IP. I did, and I did a lot of IP and Ethernet and all that. And I sense now we're coming to the same thing again. There's this whole notion of disaggregation, this whole notion of CI/CD and things like that for a new generation. Well, our generation hopefully as well, but also for the newer generation. And I'm particularly...
You're not that old.
Well, thank you. But anyway, the thing that was really interesting in terms of the younger generation, we had an apprentice just start with us, at the start of the month, and he's absolutely brilliant. He's frighteningly brilliant, and he's not hassling me. He's sending me emails all the time saying, "What do I do next?" And you're thinking, "Oh God, what are you getting to do next?" Look, the thing is, he came in with skills like Linux and all that from the start. Raspberry Pis, Arduinos. He knows all this. He doesn't know what he doesn't know yet. And he's kind of just going in, playing, having a great time, learning all about this, learning about BNGs, amazing. And I think that's the thing. There's a transition going on. And I think we're following really what's been happening by the hyperscalers. We're coming to it maybe a decade later. But we're going to follow down the same road.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mario.
Time is up.
Time's up.
Said time is up. So thank you very much for joining me. And with this, I think I hand back to Hanson.
All right.